High-Tech Heroes, the program that takes you behind the scenes of today's high-tech industries, where you can meet the people and examine the ideas creating tomorrow's technology. And now, coming to you from the studios of KCAT Los Gatos, high atop the mountains overlooking Silicon Valley, here's your host, Sherwin Gooch.
Hello, I'm Sherwin Gooch. Welcome to High-Tech Heroes. Today we'd like to say a special thanks to Los Gatos station KCAT, Channel 6, for letting us use their studio. Our guest this week is a pyromaniac pilot who was born on the south side of Chicago. He also plays the flute and guitar. As a child, his electric train and chemistry set were seminal toys. He spent a large portion of his childhood in the Museum of Science and Industry and won the science fair in the 7th grade. In high school, he was active in the physics and photography clubs and took his first programming course on an IBM 1401. Our guest then attended the University of Illinois, where he was active in film groups. He was awarded 2 undergraduate degrees, one in psychology and one in mathematics, with minors in physics, physiology, and computer science. Out of school, our guest became a Unix programmer for Bell Northern Research, right here in the Valley. He moved on to be a programmer for Digital Technology Incorporated, and later moved into management at Compion. After Compion was purchased, he became Senior Director of Gould International and ran the Unix division of Gould for 4 years. He is now CEO of EUnet and is currently overseeing the installation of the Unix network in Eastern Europe. And so it's now my pleasure to welcome to our program one of the founding fathers of EurOpen and, incidentally, the inventor of the sphincter phone, Mr. Glenn Kowack. Hello, Glenn.
Hello, Sherwin.
Welcome to High-Tech Heroes.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Great. So, before we really start, Jim Bowery's been monitoring the START negotiations quite a bit, and he asked me to say something here. You should especially appreciate an old pyromaniac like you. You know, as we actually reduce strategic arms, it's important to find a way to verify that, that the arms have been destroyed, and easily verify it, and both sides know, right? Okay. Well, you know what escape velocity is?
Oh, I hope it's around 25,000 miles per hour.
Well, I usually say, that which goes up must come down, except if it reaches escape velocity, right?
Okay,
I mean, you're out of
right.
the Earth's gravity. Well, anyway, I remember it as 7 miles a second, by the way.
I think that's the same thing, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, so it came out actually during the START talks that the throw weight of the missiles, well, the delivery systems they're using, are actually 3 times what was previously published. So at the old weights, it was possible to put a package out of, well, to reach escape velocity, put it out of the Earth forever. So I had this idea about 1981, I call them nuclear fireworks. The idea is you take it and you wait till midnight and you blast this thing out and let it coast for a few days and then set it off and see. Anybody who's not blind can tell that it blew up.
Or anybody who's made blind by it, as the case may be.
Well, you have to let it go out far enough.
Right.
That's not very funny, by the way, because I had a friend who worked at Bikini Atoll during the air bursts, and he talked about, you think it'll be a flash, a big bang. He said, for 35 minutes you have to wear a welding mask so you can see, and then after 45 minutes or so you can see with the naked eye, and for an hour or more it just keeps glowing. So I mean, anybody can see it way out in space. I think the big question is whether it should be exploded on the moon or not. So what do you think?
Well, I've always thought that the best thing to do was to hire some fairly outrageous group of high school or football players who really hated the other team, take up a very large collection and do something like beat state or something, and actually write that on the moon with nuclear devices.
Oh,
it'd be much more interesting.
That's right.
It lasts.
I had actually thought you could write something like, USA plus USSR. It turns out, you've got so many nuclear devices, you could write the Lord's Prayer in script. And you could read it from Earth. I mean, it's really...
Well, that's an interesting idea. We could start an entire field of lunography, I suppose. Or spacography, as the case may be.
Lunography, I think.
Yeah, well, it's got potential.
Anyway.
Of course, which side do you put
I
it
heard a
on?
great joke.
Fire away.
What do you get when you cross Apple with IBM?
Let me guess. Hold on.
IBM. Anyway, when I first met you, I thought, well, actually, when I first saw Robin Williams, I thought that he wasn't a comedian. I thought he just had the same
Right.
disease that you have.
So,
He may, actually. I'm not sure if it's viral or otherwise. I haven't figured out the right test for it yet.
So, anyway, so how do you like my SIGGRAPH badge?
I think it's kind of interesting.
Basically
Although it
SIGGRAPH.
looks like it's a Hopi symbol, actually.
Well, I don't know. Maybe that's where the SIGGRAPH people got it. But, you know, it's hard to find new symbols. I mean, they've all been around forever.
Where was that, where was the meeting?
The meeting was in Las Vegas. But this badge is made by Ed Livers and Tom Eubann. And, you know, it's actually on loan from Joe Sykos.
I never have the good pins when I'm on TV.
Yeah, well, I
I'm
don't
pin
know.
deficient, actually.
So, do you know Tom Eubann?
No, I don't think so.
Oh. I think he used to work at Gould. And,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I do know Tom Eubann.
Yeah, right.
But it has been a while, and I hadn't plugged him in. I didn't know you knew him.
Oh, well, he's a friend of Ed's and the Purdue crowd, so.
Right.
Anyway, George Goebel's at Purdue also.
Yeah, we used to work a lot with George when we were at Gould. George is quite a guy. He's amazing.
Yeah, I'd like to have George on this
That
show.
would be a great idea. He's a computer addict, but with astonishing skills. He could get into
Great pinball
details
player.
like nobody else I knew.
Yeah. Well, I guess the Pentagon always calls him, you know, so I've heard that he fixed up the machines for Gould a number of times.
I think he was fixing up machines for everyone he used machines for. He had a really interesting habit of taking any machine he got his hands on and beating the living daylights out of it, and thus uncovering bugs that nobody else found. I think at one point he was contributing software fixes to Aberdeen Proving Grounds, which at one point was actually distributing a variety of releases of Unix. I think Mike Moose was there at the time, but I'm not absolutely certain.
Yeah, well, people keep giving him mainframes, I guess, just to have him hammer on them.
Yeah,
and tell
that's
him what's
right.
wrong.
Well, that's what we did at Gould, and with,
Oh.
to great effect.
Anyway, so how did DTI start?
DTI was a spin-off from the Center for Advanced Computation at the University of Illinois. Around 1976, 77, the federal funding climate really changed. It used to be in the early 70s, our professors like Heinz von Forster could get money for any kind of project, just for interesting ideas. You know, think about writing things on the surface of the moon and the like. But by 76, 77, that sort of defense spending craziness had ended. The university decided that some of the teams that had gotten DARPA or ARPA money weren't really in the university's interest anymore, so they tried to push them out of the university. And Pete Alsberg, Gary Grossman, and a few others decided to spin off and start a group taking the government research contracts that they'd already had.
Right.
A really nice vehicle for commercialization of some prototype technology they'd worked on.
Wasn't that really University of Illinois equipment?
Oh, it probably was, but
No, I think it was technically it was in.
Yeah, I wasn't that
Pete's
close to
name,
it.
I think, but,
Hard to say.
It was kind of sad when we lost our link to ARPANET, you know.
Well, but we did give you at the university free access for a few years, so
thank
we
you
were
so much.
we were trying to be generous about it.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'd love to have Grossman on the show. He's another.
Grossman is fabulous. He's terrific.
So what are some of the things that you worked on at DTI?
I did a variety of tool-oriented tasks. We were about 12 people when I got started. The group had originally done things like the first fast inter-process communication for Unix, some experiments for the Defense Communications Agency to demonstrate that Unix, in fact, was a suitable platform for network and protocol processing.
Right.
So we continued on with that research. We continued on extensions to Unix for networking, modifications of IPC, and adding a whole suite of NCP and then eventually TCP and IP protocols, which in 1979, 1981 were pretty new, and it was fun stuff to work on. Again, I worked on the tool side because I was relatively junior in those days, so I worked on a Pascal compiler, a preprocessor, and then lots of small tools to make programming work.
Networks are always fun, and I think we're going to talk more about networks later.
I think so. Just one quick note, though. One of the things that we concentrated on in those days was viewing ourselves as tool builders. There's a really nice idea in the Unix philosophy, which is that you build lots of little tools and stand on those and then build other tools. And I think that's a trait that still exists among some developers, but a lot of people are losing it, I think.
Well, I think there's a reason for that. I think that people are more and more able to keep track of every minute that their programmers work. And then it doesn't leave any time to be altruistic. And you know, a lot of times when you build a tool, you're thinking about fan out. You know, you can use it for the job, but if it's a general purpose tool, then everybody can use it, or a lot of people can use it. And it seems like management really doesn't like to have people spend time doing that.
Well, if it's a good idea, and I think it is, they'll go out of business.
Yeah,
so it won't be too big a problem.
But I mean, it could be a lot of people who go out of business, or a very large group.
Could be.
So what kind of things did your group at Gould do?
We started off doing some basic ports for Gould. We started getting involved with Gould around late 1982. They had internally done a Unix port under terrible internal pressure, and they were able to go to us and write very rigid contracts, which sort of saved them from themselves. A lot of corporations are dragged by the minute-to-minute characteristics of the marketplace. Having an outside vendor provide an operating system for you gave everyone the chance to freeze things in place.
So it's all Unix?
It was essentially all Unix. We did the first generally commercially available port for their machines. We did the first dual processor CPU.
Now that was a successful port too, because the government used it and still uses it.
I believe so, but I've not been tracking Gould for the last few years.
Well, Goebel still has a machine.
Well, George doesn't yet qualify as the United States government, but he's getting close.
But my understanding is that the only reason he has a machine is to keep their machines running.
Well, that's certainly possible.
Sort of an insurance policy.
Right. So we worked on dual processor systems. Over the next few years, we started working on a variety of extensions to Unix. We worked on multiprocessing.
Yes.
You can think of that as the base. We worked on real-time modifications to Unix, which is pretty tricky.
And still really needed.
Absolutely.
Still really necessary.
And then finally, we worked on a lot of other extensions in the area of security, which we'd done a lot of at DTI in the earlier days.
Great. So you had a distributed executive?
I would call it rather something that was capable of having two processors running in the kernel at the same time, but just in different critical sections. So distributed, not quite. Maybe multiprocessor.
Well, we have to take a break now, but we'll be right back. And when we do, Glenn's going to tell us about connecting networks in Eastern Europe. So see you on the other side.
There's a new program in San Jose called the Benny McEwen Center. It's a residential mainstream alcohol recovery home for deaf and hard of hearing people. We have a 90-day co-ed program, a 30 to 60-day job search to help you return to work, and our fees are based on a sliding scale. All of our programs are based on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. For more information, please call 408-259-1983.
No, not the doorway. Under here. Hold on.
Mommy!
You okay?
Uh-huh, and baby too.
Yeah. Everybody's okay.
Remember, duck, cover, and hold.
Over there because she's taking her arm down and things like that. So I think, anyhow, so you were saying.
Okay, well, welcome back to High Tech Heroes. I'm Sherwin Gooch. Glenn Kowack is here with us today to talk about Unix networks in Eastern Europe. So, what's EurOpen? I mean, it sounds to me like, EurOpen sounds like a comment about my fly is open or something.
Well, it does have some linguistic problems. EurOpen is the recently renamed European Unix User Group. That's a good way to think about it. It started about 10 years ago.
So it's capital E-U-R, capital O-P-E-N.
Okay. It started out 10 years ago as a Unix technical interest group, Unix user group in Europe. It's got 22 national Unix groups. And in the last year, they've decided to expand their role into what they call the open systems world. They're trying to advocate open systems, and Unix is the first example.
Okay. Now, in fact, about open systems, now we heard that OSI was the big thing in Europe. Is that still true?
OSI is the big thing in Europe, but in recent years, a lot of networks have decided to, at least for the near future, use IP, TCP/IP, the US DoD, and now ISO standard. Because it works, because it's available more or less for free on Sun machines, and because there are a lot of networks that are running now in Europe very successfully. I'd say there's a lot of people moving over to IP technology.
And you think that's going to continue, that trend, or?
I think it's definitely going to continue, but in the long run, I still think there's a good chance they'll move to the OSI code.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Yeah, I'd really like to see something happen where everybody could interconnect. We used to think about what I call the information utility, where you just plug into the wall and get data the same way you'd get, or actually solutions, the way you get energy now.
I think we're going to see things like that, but because of the way markets work, we're never going to see the data utility. We're going to see data utilities, and things are going to happen in
Well, I don't understand that. That's something I really have a difficulty understanding. I got a bunch of personal computers at home, and I can't find out anything from them. I think about stuff that we did 20 years ago where I could go in and find out about, you know, nuclear physics on Plato, for example,
Right.
and all the shared databases, and that stuff is still around, actually, and costs less and has just incredible amounts more information than you can put on these little PCs. But for some reason, people like to own it or something. What do you think? Why is that? Is it markets?
Well, I think the best software anywhere is by and large available on PCs now, and it has to do with the size of the market.
Right.
But I think PCs make a lot more sense economically. You can own the whole system. You can get all the CPU cycles you need, unless you're a very high-powered engineer, in which case you use a workstation. I think that's the big difference. It's individual control and access to the technology.
Well, maybe it is individual control, but I still think, you know, if you could share a database the size of the market you're talking about, say have one copy
But you can
of
still
all these different programs that are the same size as the number of programs on the shelf for the PC, think how big a database that would be.
Well, there's no reason why a PC should get in the way of having a common database. You can still have access tools to get to that thing, which makes me think about what I think is your central point, which is why don't those services exist? Why aren't we using them all? And I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Except it's very complex. I don't
I've
think
been
we've figured it out.
expecting it for 20 years, and it's one of these things that every time they build another system, it seems to get worse and harder to interact with.
I think we're going to have to do it.
Well, I'd love to. I mean, in fact, I know a whole group of people who'd love to, but it's been a long time
Right.
coming, and nobody seems to want to fund it.
Well, there's one interesting thing. You're commenting about the market working in different utilities and all the confusion. I think managing at national scales or international scales, innovation is almost impossible. It's just something that you don't manage it. You let it happen if you're lucky.
I mean,
They
we've
tried
seen
to manage
big science fail a lot of times
Well,
lately.
but not only that, I mean, controlled, managed innovation like they tried to have in the Soviet Union didn't work.
In Japan, even, it didn't work. I mean, you know,
I think that's fair.
fifth
yeah.
generation, I think we can say that.
Careful, the Japanese have a tendency to take big failures and turn them into long-term successes.
Well, I'd like to see it happen,
Yeah.
actually, but I don't have a lot of confidence that it will.
A friend of mine at Argonne Labs, Russ Overbeek, a very bright guy, thinks that the Japanese now have the best software development environment anywhere.
Mhm,
And
well, I
that's
can
fifth
believe that.
generation fallout.
So, have you been to CERN?
Several times, actually. We at EUNet connect up to HEPNet. And
What's HEPNet?
HEPNet is the High Energy Physics Network, which has essentially a sister network in the United States of a similar or identical name, I'm not sure. And that's based out of CERN, essentially. HEPNet is designed to allow all the different institutes in physics around Europe to connect to CERN.
So how much computing power do they have there?
Buckets, just
I mean,
vast
compares
gobs.
to NAL or Livermore?
Well,
Well, really, Livermore.
I would say that CERN is so much bigger than NAL or Livermore or Argonne in the first place. They probably got more computing power, but I just don't know.
Okay.
Especially because I don't think Livermore is publishing the number of crays they've got anymore.
I don't think a lot of those places are publishing how much
No.
computing they have. So, what about software development in Eastern Europe? Have you seen any of that?
I've seen quite a bit. As you know, Sherwin, I spent much of last year just wandering through Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary trying to get a feel for the industry. And as a sort of typical example of what you see there, I go and find an ad in a newspaper with a friend who speaks some Polish. I call them up. I schedule an interview the next day. These guys are doing database software. So I show up at a government institute on one of the main streets in Warsaw. I go up to the floor. I knock on the door. Completely different name of the company than the one that was in the ad. I talk to these guys.
It's like Taiwan.
Well, it probably is. I talk to these guys for an hour or two, and I say, what's going on here? You have some interesting programs, but what are you doing in this other company? So, that's our regular job. It's your regular job? Yeah, well, we work here, and that's where we're starting the other company as well. Well, how many hours a week are you spending on the new company? Oh, God, 80 hours a week. Well, how many are you spending on your main job? Oh, 3 or 4 hours a day, maybe 2 hours. Doesn't your boss mind? Oh, he's a shareholder.
So the old job is what, a government job?
Everybody in Poland has a government job
I
because
see.
it's the original job, and many of them now have a second job. So engineers, there's an entrepreneurial foment in Eastern Europe that's just heartening. It's really
Boy, that'd
exciting.
be great if you could have your bills paid and also, do a startup.
Well, there's a little problem. The government job doesn't cover the bills. It
I
maybe
see.
covers half of it. So
I
these
see.
people are doing it to survive. But it's a good motivator.
Okay, so what does it look like? Say the same or
What
very
is
different?
it? You mean the software industry?
No, I walk into a place where they're doing software development in Eastern Europe. It's not a tilt-up, right?
First
It
of
doesn't
all,
have cubes.
Think of it as being sort of garage shops. People with a few PCs, which they bought with their personal money in most cases.
Right.
There's almost no Unix to be found, except in a few
So it's
more
all
savvy places.
PC DOS. MS-DOS?
It's all PC-DOS, and many of them argue long and hard for why they wouldn't need something like Unix. That things like the PC are perfect for every development environment. And it's a little sad, they just haven't seen anything else.
Well, it's a matter of convenience.
Yeah.
How about in the USSR? You have any idea?
I haven't been to the USSR yet. I'm scheduled to go in about 6 weeks to give a talk there. But my sense is that the Soviets, like most of the Eastern Europeans, are technically very advanced in theory, but they don't have the tools we have. So they've compensated with this theoretical approach. The conversations I've had with them have been very impressive. They're disciplined, they study hard. I think we're going to see an explosion of interesting software. Not so much in Eastern Europe, but in Western Europe, because that's where all the Eastern Europeans are going to work. So we're going to see, I think, an explosion of engineering in Western Europe. And I'd like to see the United States loosen up its immigration policy to get all those engineers here, because they're leaving home anyway.
Well, I'm not sure there's any engineering to be done in the United States these days.
Well, if we get enough really insistent, stubborn engineers, there might be a
they
possibility.
might build something in spite of
it's got to happen. But one great story at one of our conferences about a year ago, Vladas Leonidas, who is the head of our network in the Soviet Union, announced that in 1981 they built their own Unix from the ground up because they couldn't get their hands on any source.
This is in the USSR?
This is in Moscow, yeah.
Okay.
He said, but by 1986 the West had managed to penetrate the Soviet Union with Unix technology somehow. They don't have any idea how it got in the country, but they started using actual AT&T source code around those
so
days.
somebody shipped them the source so they wouldn't diverge.
You know, it could have come down out of the sky.
It's kind of backwards, isn't it? I mean, you want people to work on your code instead of, you know, in the old days of the Ryad 1 and stuff, they'd steal designs for computers and core stacks and operating systems, and now you try to give them the operating system so everything's compatible.
Well, given how error-prone Unix still remains, I think it might have been the best way to subvert the Soviet military machine for a while.
Well, you know, that's funny because I remember a control data vice president about 1971 or 2 had a great quote in Science magazine. He said that the Russians' biggest mistake was copying what IBM did with computers rather than following their own logic.
In fact, that's exactly what the Japanese did, too. They put a tremendous amount of money into mainframes, and now they're all sitting there with some dinosaurs.
Right. So you did some work for Harris on stack machines, didn't you?
In around 1986, maybe a little bit earlier, Harris designed a microprocessor that was essentially a fourth engine. And it was a really interesting chip, ultra low number of transistors. Because of the CMOS expertise of Harris, they could put a lot of peripherals around that very small core and thus get a lot of the computer on just the main IC of the machine.
Sure.
Very cool, very small.
Almost the RISC approach. I mean,
a sort of risky approach,
it's,
yeah.
Well, it's one of the advantages of RISC.
Right, exactly so. And I think they just missed the market. I came in and did some consulting in 1990 looking at their overall software situation.
So what do they run on a machine?
Their goal was to run controller programs, like, for instance, control carburation in an automobile, control sensors that would be very light, very cool, needed very low power requirements, because you could put the thing in a small package and use very little
electricity. So what did you recommend for them to use?
I recommended at that time that since they were already dedicated to Forth, that they continue on with Forth, but I was very concerned at the time because I think that the technology has passed Forth by. I think that the abundance of transistors on small real estate on a chip, the economics of training people and the like, doesn't let Forth really succeed anymore.
I think that, there's a documentation problem that's outrageous. I mean, it's like everybody writing their own macros and nobody knows how anybody else's code works. But beyond that, I think it was a good language. We had some people here, had a startup called Novix, Scott Smader in particular, somebody that we worked with around. And I guess the market bears you out because I don't know if they certainly haven't been gigantically successful.
Remember, the most important thing is people. They're the most expensive thing, they're the most valuable thing, and they're people besides. The real difficulty is trying to retool an entire industry of developers, users, and the like, and the economics don't support it anymore. 15 years ago, absolutely. Memory was expensive, real estate on the chip was expensive. It's not now. That's not the key. There are still limitations, but they're well...
So what do you see as the boundary conditions now? I mean, you're right. It used to be computing speed. It used to be memory, central memory, RAM, fast memory.
Not to edge the question, it really depends on in what area. I mean, supercomputing still needs as many cycles as they can get. Parallelization is still interesting. We still need to do those things. I think probably the biggest constraint that we have now and what we'll see for a long time is people. How fast they can learn, how fast they can retool. In fact, I think American engineers have a problem. I don't think they relearn fast enough. I think, in fact, to a certain extent, that's management's fault as well.
Well, I think that's human nature, though. I mean, things change so fast and so long. And I have this problem. I have what I call another miracle of modern packaging technology. There's a lot of packages I can't figure out how to open. finding car doors. You know, you have to like figure out how to program the car to open the door now.
Excuse me, it's a little bit like bodybuilding. You have to look for that edge. You have to look for the irritation. If you don't get irritated, you're not going anywhere. And the other thing is you have to throw away the old comforts. It doesn't work if you don't get rid of it.
I think user-friendliness is, you know, by definition, is just preventing frustration in your user.
Excuse me, I'm not talking about users. You want to prevent that in users, but the only way to prevent that in the user is to have the engineers be uncomfortable, because they have to break through their old comforts, their old habits and the like. Learning new languages, throwing away their addiction to assembly code, throwing away their addiction to hand design of chip layouts.
So what can you tell us about the Mac and Asia show in half a minute?
It was a great show. It was a lot of fun. I'm shocked at the optimism, the energy, and the creativity of the Asians. I think that if anybody's got to win, I don't mind too much if they do, but I'm going to do everything I can to build an exciting product stateside.
Well, that's great. I certainly think, well, I have a soft spot for Taiwan. I'd like to see them do well. But
yeah, Taiwan is just an unbelievable place. Every sidewalk is covered with someone making something.
Yeah, right.
You know, sidewalk foundries, furniture shops.
Yeah.
The store is behind the sidewalk. You know, you can go in there and buy the furniture, but they're making it on the sidewalk.
Exactly.
It's great. It's gas.
Well, so thank you for being here with us. Be sure to watch High Tech Heroes again next week. And until then, das vidanya. So what do you want to do after this?
It's great.
Okay, sounds good to me.
That was fun.
It's over.
Thank you for joining us this week for High Tech Heroes. Be sure to watch High Tech Heroes again next week, when we will bring you more entertaining information about the people and ideas behind the scenes in high-tech industry. And now, this is your announcer, Margie Foote, wishing you the best of luck and a pleasant week. Au revoir. This episode of High Tech Heroes has been made possible in part by grants from Merrick International of Mountain View, California, Linksys Incorporated of West Lafayette, Indiana, Kinetic Microscience of San Jose, California, and Cybernetic Arts of Sunnyvale, California.